Welcome to Reading Between the Reels. I'm Matt Leader.
And I'm Craig Dickinson. Today on the show, we are looking at fantastic beasts and where to find them. As you guys are, I'm sure you're aware, there is a new Fantastic Beasts coming out next week by the time this thing drops. And so we thought it'd be a great idea to go back and look at the first of the prequel series. And so that's what we're going to do tonight. And so, Matt, I have to ask, what are some of your overall thoughts on Fantastic Beasts and where to find them?
So, I think really the one word I'd use is just kind of delightful. This is just kind of a delightful film. It captures a lot of the magic that I kind of fell in love with the Harry Potter books and movies. Musically, I think that it ends up capturing quite a bit of kind of the early magic from. Oh, I'm blanking on the name. The composer for the early Harry Potter movies.
Oh, John Williams?
John Williams. That's it.
Yeah. That guy, the maestro.
I actually didn't realize this for a while, but the first, I think, 3 films are scored by John Williams in the Harry Potter movie franchise. And he sets up a lot of the motifs and a lot of the, kind of musical cues that live on throughout the rest of the movies. And there were several moments in this movie that the score reminded me of that early work of John Williams. So that was actually that was really fun. And I think that adds a lot to that magical, wondrous sense. So I really enjoyed the movie. How about you, Craig?
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it too. I like the way you described it. I remember when I saw the trailer before I knew the movie was coming out, which usually I'm kind of more plugged in, but was pretty excited that we would, because I love the Harry Potter movies and the books. I read them a couple of times, and I agree that this really feels like it's a very welcome return to that, and that's kind of the marketing too. Return to the magic type of vibes, and it's interesting that it is very much in the canon, and it builds on the established mythology, but it's kind of a more grown up Harry Potter movie. In the sense, not just the fact that the protagonists are adults versus kids, but it covers some kind of heavy ground and some big themes, talking about the rightful places of the Muggles versus the Wizarding Worlds and Grindelwald's philosophy and all that. It's got some kind of heavier stuff in it, but it doesn't feel out of place to me. It feels like it's kind of a natural extension of that. And so, one of the big questions that I had watching it this time, and I've seen it several times, was viewing order. And that's something I kind of want to readdress at the end. And just to be thinking about, like, it's set earlier. And so it's technically a prequel. But if you were introducing your kids to Harry Potter, would you start here or would you come back here?
Because you would definitely come back.
Right. And I think you would. And I want to kind of explore a little bit more about that at the end. But I also want to say that the music is great, and we'll talk about that too. I just thought also that it's just a gorgeous movie to watch. I think there's a lot of gold, very soft lighting. It's an award winner for costume design, and that is fantastic as well. And it just really is a fun, enjoyable, immersive movie.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing that I kind of enjoyed about the lighting of the film was that it wasn't like super dark. There seems to be kind of a trend in recent TV shows and movies where cinematographers will darken things and go for kind of more quote unquote natural lighting, where it has to be kind of motivated by something. So there's a candle or there's a fire, there's something that is quote unquote giving off the light, even though on the actual film set, that's typically not, that they'll fake the light from a fire, but it's motivated by something within the fiction of the world. And this film, like you said, you mentioned like the soft lighting, everything's very visible, even in some of the darker moments. There's kind of a cleanness to it, but I kind of enjoy that. Like it's a refreshing movie in a visual sense. I get kind of bogged down sometimes in some films that we watch where it gets so dark that it's just hard to kind of distinguish everything that's going on.
Yeah, no, this movie is not that. It's very clear to see what's happening, even at the beginning, which is very dark. And you only get the silhouettes, and that's one of the shots I had initially. That you see the silhouettes of the Aurors going to take on Grindelwald, and then you have this great shot of just the back of his head. And so we don't see we know who it is because the very next thing is the kind of the exposition through the newspaper and whatnot, and we can kind of figure out, oh, that was meant to be Grindelwald. Uh, but one thing I noticed this time that I really thought was cool, because I've always liked that shot, is the very first time that we see Graves, aka Grindelwald's, alias. We see him from the front, but then almost immediately we see him from the back in almost exactly the same shot. And it's really kind of, I think, a beautiful piece of foretelling. And they have, so kind of the same hairstyle and everything too. So it's kind of a cool nod to those of us that are paying attention that's happening. I also really enjoyed. It's funny you mentioned the light and how much I like the light, but some of the things that I pointed out were dark stuff. So the first time that we see Graves again and then Credence meeting, they're very much in shadow, and we can not really see the faces. And it's interesting that they're trying to hide from the people in the film, like the other characters, but they're also hiding it from us. And so we're let in on things very, very slowly. And I really appreciate how deliberate those choices are.
Oh yeah. I also think that it's interesting. They use early on the newspaper to kind of as like I always wish they would hold it like just a hair longer so that I have
Yeah.
more time to read it, but they kind of use that, which feels like to me kind of an homage to Alfonso Cuarón's Prisoner of Azkaban movie,
Hmm.
where there's a lot of use of posters and papers and movements toward those to kind of signify, like information, kind of a little information dump for the audience.
Yeah, that's very similar to something else I had too, where you mentioned I kind of want it to linger a little bit. Like that's why it works, is because it keeps you moving. It's kind of the same thing the first time they go into the briefcase and you're looking at all of the creatures in there. You just get a glimpse, and but you want to see more of each of these things. There's more to it than you're actually seeing, and reminds me a bit of like the cantina scene in the original Star Wars, where you get glimpses enough to kind of I could probably pick out 6 to 7 different creatures, but you knew there's 20 other ones in there that you haven't seen and you want to see more. It's like they're giving you just enough to kind of to whet the appetite, but not enough to bore you with it. Anything else with color? We've talked about camera work a little bit, and there was a couple other things I noticed. How much Credence's world is very monochrome.
Mm.
Where he lives, I thought was really interesting. Other than the very bright and colorful mural of the second Salemers with the
Yeah.
broken wand and the fire and stuff, but
And it's very
his
black and
world's
white,
depressing. Yeah,
and I think that it's like an interesting choice story wise to go with. I don't know what you would call them, like conspiracy theorists,
sure.
like of that age, where it's like the witches are real. Of course, we know that's true within the fiction. So, but it's like this weird kind of like Puritan sect of like,
Yeah,
and so I think that's a good catch with kind of the more monochrome, kind of muted colors in the orphanage. But I also think that it's like it's almost kind of a fun nod to American history, because like the film itself, we haven't really mentioned this, like takes place in America, which is very different than because Harry Potter is very, very British in many ways, and this is kind of introducing a larger world to the world that Rowling created in the books. And so it's like, that's, to me, that was kind of like a fun nod to American roots, American history of like the Puritans and being kind of uptight, people about that kind of stuff. Not that they're, good, but I found that kind of a nice tip of the hat.
yeah. As we're talking, I'm realizing something I should have noticed earlier. Like, it's black and white because that's how they see the world, right?
Yeah.
It's complete lack of nuance.
Yeah. That's exactly what I thought you were kind of getting at with the muted colors. Is like they don't see the fullness of like the truth of the world. They don't accept it.
Mm-hmm.
Where like the world they see is black and white's muted, and because they won't accept like magic.
Right. Yeah, that isn't even where I was at yet. See, I just needed to talk to you, and then it just comes out. That's part of the beautiful of the organicness of this. Anything else, cinematography wise, that you want to cover? Anything else that struck you as particularly interesting?
So I do want to just kind of to like jump around a little bit with this because I think what I enjoyed about like the lighting and the cinematography is how much it kind of luxuriates in the setting and design. You
Mm.
mentioned that was an Oscar that they won
Yeah, for costume
for
design,
costuming.
actually.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I mean, it all flows together because
sure.
it definitely fit. You know, it's 1920s New York, and it feels like that. But on
And
a
what like
little twisted version.
yes, but like what a fun world to kind of visit, as it were. And it feels in some ways kind of like a historical set piece because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the outside nomad world is that 1920s where every guy's wearing a suit. Some are nicer than others, but the women are kind of in their 1920s flapper, where they got the speakeasy with the magical pictures and stuff. And like you mentioned how there's like a lot of gold. It feels like a lot of gold and blue and these kind of tones of like both warmness and just kind of luxury in a sense, where it's not afraid to kind of wallow in the 1920s ness of the setting. And so like from that perspective, I think it's just like a really fun setting for the film to take place in.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I just I had gold everywhere. Like seemed like every aspect that I looked at, I was like, wow, there's more gold there. I saw that with set decoration too. The bank is just super opulent,
Tons.
everything.
Yes, I noticed
Yeah,
that too.
it's before the crash, right? So it's like we're living high on the hog up until all this comes crashing down. But yeah, and it adds to the escapism too.
Hmm.
The fact that it's this very specific time period that's not it's foreign to us. I mean, it's almost Harry Potter is very much you can just be described as low fantasy, right? There's like fantasy layered on top of ours, but this almost feels a little more high fantasy just because you also have that time period um, so separate from ours as well. It's not the 21st century. It's so far. It's 100 years ago. So
I also
there's a lot more.
I also think that there's a lot of fun with some of the props, like the suitcases, the switcheroo that you have. And,
Yeah.
to your point earlier about like, would you watch, even though this is chronologically earlier, you have to watch it later, partly because some of the gag and like the setup of the plot is the fact that the muggles can't know about, the wizarding
Right.
world. And even though that is touched on, like it's not touched on as deeply as like watching the rest of the films or reading the books. And like the little switcheroo is kind of a fantastic little trick because it's something that we don't notice. And I honestly forgot to look for the switch, but I bet if we went back, you would probably see Eddie Redmayne put his suitcase down and then Dan Fogler, Kowalski, pick it up, right? And a little sleight of
Yeah.
hand.
Yeah. I looked for that too. And I think it might even be just out of frame. It's the way they do. You see him move it. He puts his suitcase really close to the
Mm-hmm.
wall. And it's like, if you would have just set it right next to you, then none of this adventure would happen. But I think we need it. We need the movie to happen. That's
Yeah.
that's part of the fun. But yeah, it is a great gag just to like, these guys had the same looking suitcase. So.
And then they open it up and it's the pastries.
Yeah.
That's
Great
fantastic. I mean, I have to say this. I love Kowalski. I love the fact that when he
Oh
goes
yeah.
to the bank, his business plan is just a suitcase full of pastries. Like that's fantastic. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah, he's fantastic in this. Fogler's great in this. Yeah, he's just, oh yeah, can you smell that smell that zest, and he just clearly has just relish for what he can do and what he loves food.
Yeah.
He's so idealistic in that moment, and then it just comes crashing down until he goes on this
But
adventure.
isn't that like the perfect like match for Scamander, like Newt's
Yeah,
optimism and like worldview of like the magical creatures.
I love that. Yeah,
So
they're both idealists.
yeah, exactly. I mean, different
Yeah,
topics, but they got that same mentality. So I didn't think about that until you mentioned it, but that's really they're kind of built in the same mold, as it were.
nice. They're kind of foils for each other.
Yeah.
Um, I did, I did want to point out a couple of things that I really liked in sound and soundtrack. We talked a little bit about the music already on. There's a couple of things I want to touch on as well, but I've always enjoyed, and it's again, it's the same universe as the other Harry Potter movies, so you still get some similar things. Like it's kind of like a bubble sound when they walk through the bank for the first time. Like that's kind of their, and it almost has like that effect as well, like visually, that it's like behind this thing, that the way they distort things from the Muggle view or the Nomad view into the magical view. I was like that audio cue is kind of fun as well, and just the fact that there's wind and rain inside the briefcase. If you don't really you hear it before you see it, which is fun, which kind of adds to the scale of the briefcase. It's a really cool way to kind of use audio cues to let you know how big the suitcase is inside, and that's fun. You know, we mentioned John Williams' earlier work, so we have Hedwig's theme at the beginning, just a little bit. That it's almost like, you know, and it almost functions a little bit like the 20th Century Fox logo with
A
Star
little bit.
Wars.
Yeah.
You know, where you're like, yeah, okay, this is familiar,
I know where I'm at.
and then that launches into a new Fantastic Beast theme, which is great. You know, we have um, one second here. We have James Newton Howard, who we've talked about before when we did Batman Begins. You know, he's done tons of films, over 100 films, and so you know he's obviously a pro, and his score is fantastic. Some new themes, right? We talked about the Fantastic Beast theme. There's Grindelwald has a theme. Newt has a like a very hopeful theme, kind of jaunty piano theme. Just some great, and then diegetic music too, right? We get that 1920s era music in the Goldstein's apartment, and also like there's a vocal performance by a house elf,
Mm-hmm.
which is just a lot of fun.
Very unique. I mean, the music is very evocative of that flapper 1920s, like what you would expect from that era, right? I'm not an expert in music. I'm not a musician, so I can't like
Nor
describe
am
it
I.
fully. But it's like when you hear it, you're kind of like, yeah, that's kind of what I would like expect. Which, but again, that's kind of fun. It's part of that set piece, right? The music is kind of part of that, woven into making it feel like the 1920s vibe throughout the film. For me, I was thinking about this, like how to explain this. And what I came up with is like sometimes when you are like tasting something, tasting food, tasting wine would be a good example. And sometimes you just get like a hint of something else. Like you get a hint of blackberry or something like that, right? Or you get a hint of thyme when you're eating a meal. That's kind of how the soundtracks feel to me is they will kind of have these little moments of like, oh, that kind of reminds me of this feeling, or like that music that's evocative of the 1920s, that flapper, right? It's not what they listen to, obviously, because it was written, in like 2016 or whatever. But it just has that flavor to it. And there was one moment when I was watching it, and what it struck me was that sounds like Home Alone. And I'm forgetting the exact moment when I heard it, but it was just like, that sounds like John Williams. Like that's what it reminded me of. And so that's, when I was mentioning earlier, how it feels like it's got that kind of John Williams feel to it, is it just had some string of notes, some melody, whatever it was. And, maybe it was, a riff on Harry Potter theme, because, Williams did a bunch of that too. But whatever it was, the theme, the musical flavors just hit me with this movie. And that is one of the biggest reasons why I think this film captures that magic of the other earlier Harry Potter films, is that music gets in there and hits those flavors just right.
Yeah, that speaks very much to the fact that they brought everybody back, right? That you have David Yates, who had done like the last four Harry Potter movies as your director, and then you've got J.K. Rowling actually doing, the screenwriting. She actually wrote the script for this film. And so you very much have like, this is going to be very much connected. It's in that universe. It is not going to be, it's going to feel like it should. It's going to feel like a Harry Potter movie with a twist, but it is, it's going to hit all those same literally notes for us as we watch the film. You mentioned Fogler earlier on the performances. Eddie Redmayne is fantastic as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything in particular you want to point out about performances that we haven't touched on just yet?
I the biggest thing is that I really enjoyed Colin Farrell,
Yeah,
and that was my biggest disappointment at the end. Is
that he was
when
gone.
yeah, when he was replaced by Johnny Depp. I think Johnny Depp's a fine actor, but like I really enjoyed Colin Farrell's performance. Like
Mm-hmm.
it felt more nuanced than the script kind of set him up to be. Like pretty early on, the script made it like fairly obvious that he wasn't like on the up and up. He was not a good guy. But I think that Colin Farrell's performance kind of hits a pretty nice note where it's not obvious in his performance per se. I think in the overall like editing with him meeting with Ezra Miller as Credence in like the shadows, it's like okay,
Right.
I kind of get where that's going. But I think overall the performances were really good. I particularly enjoyed Colin Farrell. Catherine Watterson has a nice, almost kind of uptight and shrill performance. Like she's just like an uptight character, meaning, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she plays that off really well. But Dan Fogler as Kowalski's my absolute favorite. I love him.
Yeah, he's fantastic. A couple things I wanted to kind of build off of what you had said about Catherine Watterson's Tina Goldstein being kind of uptight is the way that they are dressed, her and her sister.
Mm-hmm.
Right, her sister is very feminine in the way her clothes, way she's dressed, and Tina is not. She's almost genderless, if not masculine, in the way that she presents herself. Up until they go to the speakeasy, and then it's like, oh, okay, so she's also this has this side of her personality, and so a brilliant costume. Again, it's an Academy Award winner for costume design. They knew what they were doing, but I just think that really fits her persona, and she just leaned into that very stiff, very formal persona. Speaking of stiff, though, Eddie Redmayne playing Newt like he's on the autism spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. I don't think it's actually been fully confirmed that that's what he was doing, but it feels very much like he has Asperger's, especially with the lack of eye contact, which is, I think, one of his most telling characteristics as the character, which I thought was interesting this time. That I wanted to pay as much attention to that particular aspect as I could, and then I noticed that when he is with Tina and she's about to die in that execution chamber,
Mm-hmm.
he looks her right in the eye. And it's really telling that, that he is making that step to make sure she listens to him and trusts him. And really you see from then on the rest of the film that he is making a point of looking her in the eye. And I just thought what an awesome choice. I mean, obviously he's a fantastic actor, but I just thought what a really subtle thing that most people will miss. I've missed it several times. I've seen this movie, as I mentioned before, several times. And so only while I was intentionally looking for facial expressions did I pick up that, subtle choice.
That's fantastic. I did not notice that. I do think Eddie Redmayne it is like peaking right there as like Newt Scamander feels this awkward but brilliant and sympathetic, and he has this sympathy for the magical animals and stuff, and you get a sense of that he's like just like a good person, and that is kind of revealed as the story goes. We can kind of guess from Harry Potter, like it's a Harry Potter film. It's going to deal with kind of good and evil, right? But you just get the sense that through his actions, like he's out there to save. He's very much like a zoologist. He's out there trying to preserve and educate, and like that's just really noble causes that he's working towards. And so that's something where he's like a very admirable character. And, that kind of just shines through with his performance.
Agreed. I'm curious what you thought about Ezra Miller's performance.
I thought it was good.
Yeah, no, I'm a fan of Ezra Miller. I mean, I love him as Barry Allen as well in Justice League and whatnot. I really appreciate it. I guess speaking of Eyes Down too, he very much and hunches. He looks like a wounded animal.
Mm-hmm.
The way he kind of presents himself through most of the film.
And like with that, I don't think there's like a lot of range for him, like through a lot of the film where he's kind of being very subdued. So that's where it's just like, I think it was fine. But it was definitely restrained.
Yeah. And he's a fairly tall dude. And so he kind of shrinks himself down where he's almost barely there when he's in the presence of his adopted mother. So, again, doesn't have a whole lot to do until he, becomes fully revealed as the Obscurus, but solid, I thought.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Anything else with performance? We mentioned costumes, obviously one. Hair and makeup is fantastic as well. It very much feels authentic to the 1920s. Before we move on to anything else in setting and design?
I don't think so. I mean, everything was, we kind of touched on the major things that I wanted to talk about.
It's not a highly quotable film. I looked for a thing that I would quote. There's a lot of lines that I really like, but it's not a movie that I quote. There's some things we saw with Graves where he kind of hints at things, about, so it's useless without the host, about the Obscurus, which is kind of oh, wait a minute, and you see Newt react that way too. But just some things on a second rewatch where like, obviously that's,
it's a wink and a nod. Yeah.
Right. One thing I really liked this time that I had not picked out before was that you have, as far as setting goes, is that you have this final battle in the subway, and it's literally underground, but it's also figuratively underground because no one can see it, and it really is about keeping the wizarding world under wraps. And I just thought, oh, it's like, what a brilliant place to stage your final battle.
Yeah. And speaking of that, Newt doesn't do very well. Like
no,
with the actual like spell casting, right? And that's kind of it's something I appreciate in the sense of like he's a zoologist. He's not a fighter. And like he will fight for something, like he's got a fighting spirit, but he's not like a warrior. He's an animal caretaker. And like you kind of get that sense when he's fighting Graves. Like he's really overmatched.
Right. Well, yeah, he's not someone who would legitimately do that. So it takes a lot for him to to get into that. He's not a fighter first. But he will fight when pushed and when it matters. And this is something that he has found that he's fighting for something. So yeah, that's a good catch. I also really liked the MACUSA logo. I thought that was cool. That it was very much kind of a take on the presidential seal, but a lot more aggressive.
Yeah,
I thought. And then most of MACUSA is opulent. Back to that again. It's enormous, right? The way that you have these extreme high angles and everything to show it off. But you have this interrogation room, like this cold metal, which I thought was a really interesting. Like, why do you have this place? And they were totally okay with just like executing a couple of wizards, for like letting some stuff out.
Yeah,
I mean, because that might let other Muggle or no mages know what's going on. Yeah. So there's a dark side to that place.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think you can make the argument that there's a dark side to American foreign policy in general, or the CIA.
Any country's foreign policy in general, but
sure. But I mean, it's being sent in America specifically.
Exactly.
I think you can make a connection there. They even mentioned like, I forget exactly what they say, but someone's like, what are your impressions of the wizarding world in America? And Newt doesn't hold back. He's not overly impressed with the state of affairs. in the wizarding world in America. So it's not really touched on much, which is why I didn't really bring, it's kind of spoken and then dropped. They don't really touch on it again, but I think that's there.
No, definitely. And that, there's a physical example of that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely meant for you to think about it. And props, we talked about the magic briefcase, which is an awesome plot device. The Deathly Hallows necklace is a fun little nod too, where you're like, again, if you're paying attention, and this is another going back to, you should probably have seen the first 8 Harry Potter movies, or at least read the books before. Otherwise, that means nothing to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just have the book is mentioned. We don't see the Fantastic Books book, but it is. Oh, hey, that's the book. This is the thing that caused this whole movie to be made. So that's kind of a fun nod.
So kind of like getting to the end of this, what did you think about the ending with the magic rain?
Well, it's Deus Ex Machina big time. It's beautiful. I really like the visuals of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's in slow motion, and the music is beautiful, and the witches and wizards volunteer to walk out there. I'm not sure how it helps the people that are indoors. That's kind of weird. I go with it, but I always go.
Everyone's out there. They're all looking.
Every single person is out
right.
there. It is a little bit of a, like I said, it's a little bit of laziness. That's lazy writing. Deadpool. But I don't know. What do you think?
I feel like it kind of hits the emotions well. If it even if it doesn't like make the most sense, like in the moment, I'm kind of willing to like roll with it. It's tough watching my boy Dan Fogel get his memory wiped, or Fogler. All right.
Yeah.
But and I think that's kind of the sad final note that you're kind of leaving with for me, because he was really the most fun for me. And I think, like, I was thinking about why, and it's because Kowalski's he's the person who's new to the world. You're experiencing kind of the wonder of the world through his eyes again. And you missed that with the later Harry Potter films. You don't have that same sense of wonder because you're kind of in the world. And that's what one of the best parts of this film is that sense of wonder and amazement. And you don't get that without Kowalski. So it's sad for him to walk out into, the rain and the goodbyes and everything. And so, I emotionally, I think it was hitting the right notes. Although I think if you try and dissect it, it doesn't necessarily hold up.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. Like emotionally, and I didn't have that criticism the first time I saw it. I was just like, oh, that's beautiful, and what a great way to fix it. But yeah, he's, Kowalski's us, right? And so, the movie's almost over. It's time for us to go.
Yep.
We're leaving the magical world.
Yep.
And that's why you have, the coda at the end where it's kind of like, hey, there's going to be a sequel, right? Which is, again, for the audience, it's totally what that is. Because if you start to think about that too much, you're like, Queenie, you are totally screwing this up. Like, that is not okay that you went back and did this. Like, morally speaking, this is a problem. But again, don't think about it too much because it feels good.
Yeah.
At this point for us.
Yep.
I have a couple of other nitpicks just here at the end. And I wasn't sure where to put them. I did feel, again, on subsequent rewatches, there's a little bit of a bait and switch thing with the obscurial thing with the mythology, where they're very much like, no, it has to be a kid. It has to be a kid. It has to be a kid. And they're like, no, guess what? No, it doesn't. We broke our own rules.
That's a tough one because, like, Credence is supposed to be kind of an extraordinary person, right? And so, I mean, the whole premise of like Harry Potter is that you have the killing curse and it doesn't work one time.
Right.
So it's, this kind of thing, I guess, does kind of have precedence in this.
That's true.
That's
a good point.
Story, right? But I get what you mean, where it still feels a little cheap by the end of the movie, where it's like, you're setting up X and you're setting it up, setting it up, setting it up, setting it up, and then it's why. And it's like, okay, I'm surprised, but that's not really, it's not as earned as it could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, there's a billion moving parts in this film. So again, I thoroughly enjoyed the movie, but that was just a thing that always just kind of rubbed me the wrong way a little bit. I do want to say this is my kind of like my last final thought is that I recently reread Deathly Hallows, and this is another reason why you should read the books and watch the Harry Potter movies before you watch this one. It's because there are so many wonderful little Easter eggs for this film in that book. There's so much of the lore about Grindelwald and the greater good and all of these things. And, we're going to see Aberforth in the next movie as well, Dumbledore's brother. And so it's really building on a lot of that, just kind of, so almost seemed like random throwaway plot threads in the Harry Potter book it's kind of becoming the basis of these new films. And so I highly suggest if you have not read those books, or if you haven't read those books in a long time, like there's a lot of stuff that's coming that's pretty much been already laid out for us. It just kind of has to fit within those framework. For instance, spoiler alert, Grindelwald doesn't die. He's an old man by the time we get to Deathly Hallows. So there's going to be some twists and turns before we get there. But a lot of the stuff, having seen this movie and then reading the book a second time, I was like, oh my gosh, all of these things, even some of the creatures like nifflers and bowtruckles and whatnot, just kind of adds another layer for your enjoyment.
So as we close, we just want to say thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook, email us at readingbetweenreels@gmail.com, or use the SpeakPipe app on our website.
And speaking of the SpeakPipe app, we have a voicemail.
We have a voicemail.
We do, from our friend Corey. So we'll go ahead and play that now.
Name's Corey, longtime listener, first-time caller. All right. You ever think that Zack Snyder's Justice League has Superman die at 2 hours and 38 minutes and 38 seconds and be resurrected in Justice League at 2 hours, 38 minutes and 38 seconds at the exact same moment? You ever think, perhaps, what if creation to Jesus' death and Jesus' resurrection to the end when he comes back again is the same symmetrical pattern? That would be kind of cool. That's the kind of thing that you get with Zack Snyder. You get movies that have like a powerful message hidden. If you don't believe me, go look at the end of Batman versus Superman when Superman dies and you see Wonder Woman and Batman lifting down Superman's body, and there's 3 crosses in the background. Zack Snyder did that stuff intentionally. The savior of the people died and sacrificed himself for the world. It's very powerful symmetrical or very powerful patterns that Zack Snyder puts in these things that people don't realize. So these are great movies.
Well, I mean, I agree with that.
Yeah, no,
Matt's a little.
I actually do agree that Zack Snyder. Yeah. I agree with Corey that Zack Snyder, hides these things in his film. In fact, he hides them so well that it's a struggle to find them. So
but that's why we're here to help pull those out. So
not me,
thanks
though,
for that, Corey.
Yes, thank you, Corey, for the message.
And yeah, so guys, if you're listening and you have thoughts like that or about any of the films that we're talking about, please send them to us. There, just click on the website. It's super easy to get to. As it's also super easy to leave us a review on your favorite podcast catcher. It's not hard at all. It's right there. And yeah, guys, we just want to hear feedback. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And those reviews just really help us get the word out about the podcast. You also have the option of joining our Facebook group. It's a safe place to share your thoughts, discuss all things related to movies, ask us questions, and make comments about the show.
And on a final note, the next episode that we will have will be a review of Sam Raimi's Army of Darkness. Send us an email or voicemail about your favorite moments from Army of Darkness, and we'll share them on the next episode.